There's a sound that lives in my head rent-free, and it's not a scream, it's not glass breaking, it's not even a raised voice. It's the soft, almost invisible clink of a small brown bottle being placed back onto the top shelf of a kitchen cabinet. Gentle, careful, like whoever was putting it back didn't want the world to hear. And the thing is, I wasn't supposed to hear it either. I wasn't supposed to see it. I was supposed to be asleep on the couch with my face buried in a cushion, while my grandmother, the woman who raised me, the woman who held me at my parents' funeral, the woman who told me every night that I was the only reason she was still alive, stood in our kitchen and squeezed 3 drops of something into my soup. I watched her do it through barely open eyes. I had my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it from across the room. She unscrewed the cap slowly, tilted the bottle over the pot, and let it drip. 1, 2, 3, into the same soup she had been feeding me since I was 7 years old. Then she stirred it in with a wooden spoon, placed the bottle back on the highest shelf in the cabinet, a shelf I'd never been tall enough to reach as a kid, and wiped her hands on her apron. She didn't rush. She didn't look over her shoulder. She moved like a woman who had done this 1,000 times before, because, as I would later find out, she had. For 10 years. 10 years of stomach cramps that made me curl into a ball on the bathroom floor. 10 years of dizziness so bad I couldn't stand up without grabbing onto something. 10 years of doctors scratching their heads, and running blood panels that came back inconclusive, telling my grandmother I just had a sensitive constitution while she sat beside me in every waiting room, squeezing my hand and whispering, "Don't worry, baby, Grandma's gonna take care of you." And she did take care of me. She took care of making sure I never had enough strength to leave her. She kept me home from school more days than I attended. She blocked every friendship before it started. She talked me out of sports, out of clubs, out of anything that might take me further than the front porch. By the time I was 16, I had never been to a sleepover, never ridden in a friend's car, never stayed anywhere overnight that wasn't under her roof. And I didn't question it because when you grow up inside something, you don't know it's a cage. You think it's just the shape of the world. But that summer, the summer I turned 17, she had to leave for 2 weeks to take care of her sister after a surgery. And for the first time in my life, I was alone. I cooked my own meals. I slept through the night without waking up in pain. I stood in the backyard one morning and took a breath so deep and so clear that I didn't recognize my own body. And when she came home and the sickness came back within 48 hours, something in the back of my mind started whispering a question I wasn't ready to answer. My name is Elliot, and this is the story of how I caught my grandmother poisoning my food, not to kill me, but to make sure I never had the strength to walk away. I need to take you back to where this all started, because if I just tell you my grandmother poisoned me, you'll picture a monster. Some cold, heartless woman with dead eyes and bad intentions. But that's not who she was. That's not how this worked. And that's exactly what made it so hard to accept when the truth finally surfaced. My grandmother was warm. She was present. She was the kind of woman who hummed old hymns while she cooked breakfast, and who kept a photo of my parents on the mantel with fresh flowers beside it every single week without fail. She wasn't a villain out of a movie. She was the person who saved me. Or at least, that's the story I told myself for 10 years. I was 7 years old when my parents died. A head-on collision on Route 12 during a rainstorm. I wasn't in the car. I was at home with a babysitter, sitting on the living room floor building a tower out of wooden blocks when the phone rang. I didn't understand what was happening at first. I just remember the babysitter dropping to her knees, and then a lot of strangers showing up at the house, and then my grandma Ruth walking through the front door with red eyes and shaking hands, scooping me up off the ground and holding me so tight I could feel her heartbeat against my cheek. She smelled like lavender and cinnamon, and she kept saying, "I've got you, baby. I've got you. You're coming home with me." And I did. I went home with her that night to a small house on the edge of town. A house with creaky floors and yellow wallpaper, and a garden out back that she tended to every morning before sunrise. She gave me my own room, small, and with a window that looked out at a row of oak trees, and she made it feel like mine within a week. She hung up my drawings, put my favourite blanket on the bed, and set a framed photo of my mum and dad on the nightstand so they'd be the first thing I saw when I woke up. For a grieving 7-year-old who had just lost everything, she felt like a miracle. And for a while, life with Grandma Ruth was good. Or at least, I thought it was. She cooked every single meal, never let me eat anything from outside. She said restaurant food was dirty and that home-cooked meals were the only way to keep a growing boy healthy. I didn't argue because her food was good. Thick stews, cornbread, soups that tasted like they had been simmering for hours. She walked me to school every morning and was standing at the gate every afternoon when the bell rang. And she helped me with homework at the kitchen table, quizzed me on spelling words, and read to me before bed until I was old enough to tell her I could read on my own. And even then, she looked hurt about it for days. I realized now that every small step I took toward independence felt like a threat to her, but back then, I didn't see it. I just saw a grandmother who loved me more than anything. The sickness started when I was about 8, maybe 9. It came on so gradually that I didn't even register it as something abnormal. I'd wake up with a heavy feeling in my stomach, like I'd swallowed a rock in my sleep. Some mornings, I'd be so dizzy that the room tilted when I stood up. I'd get through half the school day and end up in the nurse's office, pale and shaky. And then Grandma would come pick me up with a brown paper bag full of soup and crackers, and a look on her face that said she'd been expecting the call. She never seemed surprised when I got sick. She always seemed prepared. I didn't think anything of that at the time, but looking back, it was one of the loudest red flags I missed. She was never caught off guard by my symptoms because she already knew they were coming. The doctors became a routine. Every few months, she'd take me in for blood work, stool samples, allergy panels, the whole run. And every time, the results came back murky. Nothing definitive, no clear diagnosis. One doctor said it might be irritable bowel syndrome, another said I was probably just anxious. A third told my grandmother it could be a food sensitivity and handed her a list of things to eliminate from my diet. Now she nodded seriously, folded the paper into her purse, and I never heard about it again. "They don't know what they're talking about, Elliot," she told me in the car on the way home. "I know your body better than any doctor. I'll take care of you." And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was the only family I had left. She was the one who showed up. She was the one who stayed. By the time I hit middle school, I was the kid who was always absent, the kid who couldn't run a full lap without feeling like his lungs were filled with wet sand. Teachers stopped calling on me to participate in gym class. Other kids stopped inviting me to things because they already knew I'd say no, or worse, that my grandmother would say no for me. She had a way of declining invitations on my behalf that sounded so reasonable, so caring, and that no one ever questioned it. "Elliot's not feeling well today. Elliot needs to rest this weekend. Elliot's immune system just can't handle being around too many kids right now." She built a wall around me, one excuse at a time, and she did it with such softness that I didn't feel the bricks going up. I just felt loved, protected, safe. But I wasn't safe. I was being kept, like something fragile on a shelf, something she could hold and control and make sure never wandered too far. I was her project, her purpose, her reason to get out of bed in the morning, and she would rather have me sick and closed than healthy and gone. I just didn't know it yet. The summer I turned 17, something happened that my grandmother never planned for and could not control. Her sister, my great aunt Darlene, had a fall and needed surgery on her hip. Darlene lived 3 hours away in a town even smaller than ours, and she had no one else. No husband, no kids, no neighbours close enough to help her in and out of bed or drive her to follow-up appointments. Grandma Ruth didn't want to go. I could see it in her face the moment she hung up the phone. This tight, almost panicked look, like someone had just told her the house was on fire and she had to decide what to say first. She paced the kitchen for 2 days, calling Darlene back and forth, trying to figure out if there was another option, another relative, a church friend, anyone who could step in so she wouldn't have to leave me. But there wasn't. Now Darlene needed her, and for the first time in 10 years, someone else's need outweighed her grip on mine. She almost didn't go. The night before she left, she sat on the edge of my bed and held both of my hands like I was 5 years old again. "You call me every morning and every night," she said. "You don't leave this house after dark. You don't let anyone in, and you eat what's in the fridge. I've made enough meals to last you the whole 2 weeks. They're labelled breakfast, lunch, dinner. You just heat them up and eat. Promise me, Elliot." I promised. I meant it too. I wasn't trying to rebel. I wasn't plotting some kind of escape or throwing a party the second her car pulled out of the driveway. I was 17 years old and I had never spent a single night alone in my life. And honestly, I was terrified. Now she had spent a decade teaching me that I was fragile, that the world outside our front door was too rough for someone like me. and I had absorbed that lesson so completely that the thought of being by myself for 14 days felt less like freedom and more like being stranded. The first 2 days, I followed her instructions to the letter. I heated up the meals she had left. I called her in the morning and again before bed. I stayed inside. I watched television. I moved through the house like a ghost haunting his own life. But by the third day, something started to shift. Something I didn't have a name for yet. I woke up and my stomach didn't hurt. Not even a little. No cramping, no nausea, no heaviness sitting behind my ribs like a stone I couldn't cough up. I lay in bed for a few minutes waiting for it to come, because it always came, and every single morning for as long as I could remember. But it didn't. I got up, walked to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and noticed that the dark circles under my eyes, the ones I thought were just part of my face, looked lighter. I brushed my teeth and realized my hands weren't shaking. That might sound like nothing to someone who has never been chronically sick, but for me it was like discovering a new color. I had no frame of reference for what it felt like to wake up without pain. I didn't even know that was something a body could do. By day 5, I stopped eating the meals she had left in the fridge. It wasn't intentional at first. I just forgot to heat one up and made myself a sandwich instead. Yeah, and then I scrambled some eggs the next morning because I wanted something warm and fresh rather than a container that had been sitting for nearly a week. I started cooking for myself. Simple things, nothing fancy. Rice, canned vegetables, toast with peanut butter, whatever I could find in the pantry. And every single day I felt better. Not just a little better, noticeably, physically, unmistakably better. The dizziness that had followed me around like a shadow since childhood was gone. The fatigue that made my legs feel like they were filled with concrete by 2 in the afternoon just vanished. I slept through the night without waking up once. No cramps pulling me out of sleep at 3 in the morning. No lying on the bathroom floor pressing my face against the cold tile waiting for a wave of nausea to pass. For the first time in my life, and I slept like a normal person. I woke up like a normal person. I felt like a normal person, and I didn't know what to do with that. On day 8, I went outside, not just to check the mail or sit on the porch. I walked. I walked down the road, past the oak trees, past the church on the corner, all the way to the gas station a mile from our house. And I wasn't out of breath when I got there. I bought a bottle of water and a bag of chips, and I stood in the parking lot eating them in the sun, and I felt something I'd never felt before, a kind of lightness, not just in my body but in my mind, like someone had taken a coat off my shoulders I didn't know I was wearing. I remember standing there thinking, who am I right now? Because this person who could walk a mile without his legs giving out, who could eat without his stomach turning inside out, who could breathe without feeling like his lungs were wrapped in plastic. This person was a stranger to me. I had never met him. I didn't know he existed. And the most terrifying part wasn't that I felt different. It was the question forming in the back of my skull that I kept trying to push away but couldn't. If I feel this good without her here, then why do I only feel sick when she's home? She came back on a Sunday afternoon. I heard her car pull into the driveway and I went out to help her with her bags. And she hugged me so hard I thought she'd crack a rib. "Oh, I missed you," she said. "Let me make you something to eat. You look thin." That night she made soup, her famous soup, the one she had been making me since I was a kid. I sat at the table and ate 2 full bowls because I had missed her and I had missed the taste, and I wanted to believe that the question in my head was just paranoia. By Monday morning, the cramps were back. By Tuesday, the dizziness returned. By Wednesday, I was back on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m. with my cheek pressed against the tile, and that question I had been trying to bury was no longer whispering. It was screaming. I didn't sleep that Wednesday night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while my stomach churned and my mind raced in circles, and I kept going over it again and again. The 2 weeks, the health, the return, the sickness, the timing. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself that maybe I had just caught a bug, maybe the stress of being alone had temporarily masked my symptoms, maybe my body had simply had a good stretch and now it was back to its baseline. I ran through every rational explanation I could find because the irrational one, the one that was clawing at the inside of my chest, was too horrifying to sit with. But the thing about a truth like that is it doesn't care whether you're ready for it. It just keeps knocking. And by Thursday morning, I had decided I wasn't going to argue with it anymore. I was going to find out. I started watching her. Not obviously, I wasn't following her around the house or staring at her from across the room. I was subtle about it, or at least I tried to be. I watched her cook. I paid attention to when she told me to leave the kitchen and when she'd let me stay. I noticed that she always served my plate herself, always had, for as long as I could remember, and that she never ate the same thing she gave me. She'd make a pot of soup and serve me a bowl, and then fix herself something different, a piece of toast, some leftover rice, a sandwich. When I asked her why, she said she just wasn't hungry for soup, or that her stomach was bothering her, or that she'd eaten earlier. She always had an answer, she always had a reason. Even every reason sounded perfectly normal until you lined them all up next to each other and realized that in 10 years, she had never once eaten from the same pot she served me from. Not once. By Friday I had a plan. It wasn't a sophisticated one. I was a 17-year-old kid running on fear and adrenaline and a gut feeling that was getting louder by the hour. That evening I told her I was tired, which wasn't a lie because my body was wrecked again, and I lay down on the couch in the living room. From that angle, I had a clear line of sight into the kitchen. Not a perfect one, I couldn't see the stove, but I could see the counter, the upper cabinets, and most of the space where she moved when she cooked. I closed my eyes almost all the way, left just enough of a crack to see through my lashes, and I waited. She was in the kitchen humming in the same hymn she always hummed, His Eyes on the Sparrow, and I could hear the familiar sounds of dinner being made, the click of the burner, the clatter of a pot being set on the stove, the faucet running, the thud of a cutting board, and then, about 20 minutes in, the humming stopped. The kitchen went quiet, and I heard a sound I had never consciously registered before, but that my subconscious must have filed away 1,000 times. The creak of the top cabinet opening, the one above the refrigerator, the one I'd never been tall enough to reach. I watched her through my eyelashes, and I saw her reach up and pull something down. A small brown glass bottle, the kind you'd see in an old pharmacy, with no label on it. She held it in one hand and unscrewed the cap with the other, and she tilted it over the pot. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3, each one falling with a precision that told me she had measured this 1,000 times and knew exactly how much to use. She stirred it in with the wooden spoon, slow and deliberate, screwed the cap back on, reached up and placed the bottle back on the shelf behind a row of old mason jars where no one would ever think to look. Then she wiped her hands on her apron, picked the humming right back up, like she had just paused to take a breath, and called out to me in the sweetest voice you have ever heard. Elliot, baby, come eat, dinner's ready. I don't know how I got off that couch. I don't know how my legs carried me to that kitchen table. I don't know how I sat down across from the woman who raised me and picked up a spoon and brought it to my lips while my hands trembled so badly that the soup almost spilled before it reached my mouth. I took 3 sips, maybe 4, just enough to make it look real. I told her my stomach was acting up and I couldn't finish, and she nodded and said, "That's okay, sweetheart, I'll save it for later." I walked to the bathroom, turned the shower on as hot as it would go, knelt in front of the toilet, and threw up everything I'd swallowed. And then I sat on the bathroom floor, the same floor I'd been collapsing onto for 10 years. And I pressed my back against the wall and I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, as shaking tears that fell down my face while the shower steam filled the room, and the woman in the kitchen washed dishes and hummed about God watching over sparrows. I didn't sleep again that night. I lay in bed and I stared at the ceiling and I made a decision. I was going to get that bottle and I was going to find out what was in it. The next morning, I waited until she went out to the garden. I dragged a chair from the kitchen table to the counter, climbed up, opened the top cabinet, and reached behind the mason jars. My fingers found it immediately, small, cool, smooth glass. I pulled it out and looked at it, and it was the most ordinary thing I'd ever seen. No skull and crossbones, no warning label, just a plain brown bottle with a dropper cap, half full of something that looked like diluted tea. I slipped it into my backpack. I put the chair back and told my grandmother I was going for a walk. She looked at me for a long moment, longer than usual, and said, "Don't be gone too long." I walked 2 miles to the bus stop, rode 40 minutes to a free clinic 2 towns over, and handed the bottle to a nurse whose face I will never forget, because the moment she got the results back, every ounce of colour drained out of it. Please subscribe to this channel if you would like to get notified when we publish stories that you might like. Let's continue with the story. The nurse's name was Sandra. She was a short woman with kind eyes and a calm voice. The type of person who probably chose healthcare because she genuinely wanted to help people. and I could tell by the way her expression shifted that what she was about to tell me was something she wished she didn't have to say. She sat me down in a small room with fluorescent lighting and a poster on the wall about hand hygiene, and she placed the brown bottle on the table between us like it was evidence at a crime scene, which, as it turned out, it was. She told me the liquid inside was a concentrated herbal compound, a mixture of substances that individually might appear on the shelf of a natural remedy store, but combined in this specific ratio and administered consistently over time would cause chronic gastrointestinal distress, fatigue, nutrient malabsorption, and systemic inflammation. She said it wasn't the kind of thing that would kill someone in a single dose. It wasn't designed to. It was designed to keep someone sick, functioning enough to get through a day, but never well enough to thrive, never strong enough to feel independent, never healthy enough to question why they needed so much help. She asked me where I got it, and when I told her my grandmother had been putting it in my food, she went quiet for a long time. Then she asked me how long, and I said I thought it had been happening since I was 7 or 8 years old, and she closed her eyes and pressed her hand against her mouth, and didn't say anything for almost a full minute. When she opened her eyes again, they were wet. She told me I needed to file a report, and she told me what had been done to me had a name, that there were people who deliberately made others sick in order to maintain control over them, in order to be needed, in order to make themselves the center of someone else's survival. She said it quietly, carefully, like she knew every word was landing on something already broken inside me. And she was right, because sitting in that clinic, under those fluorescent lights, with that little brown bottle between us, I felt something collapse in my chest that I didn't have the language to describe. It wasn't anger, not yet. Anger came later. What I felt in that moment was grief, thick, suffocating grief, because the grandmother I loved, the woman I would have done anything for, the only family I had left on this earth, and she had looked at me every single day for 10 years, and chosen to keep me sick rather than risk losing me. I rode the bus home in silence. I sat in the back row with my backpack on my lap, and the bottle inside it, and I watched the trees blur past the window, and tried to figure out what I was supposed to do with a truth this big. Confront her. That was the only answer I kept coming back to. Not because I wanted to, not because I was brave, but because I couldn't sit across from her at that kitchen table one more time and pretend I didn't know what she was stirring into my food. I got home around 4 in the afternoon. She was in the living room watching television, and she smiled when I walked in and said, "There you are." I was starting to worry. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her, really looking at her, and I tried to find the monster. I tried to see cruelty in her face, malice in her eyes, something that would make this easier, something that would let me hate her cleanly and walk away without looking back. But all I saw was a 71-year-old woman in a floral housecoat with reading glasses on her nose, and a glass of sweet tea on the table beside her, and she looked exactly like the grandmother who had held me at my parents' funeral and told me everything was going to be okay. That was the cruelest part. She still looked like love. I sat down across from her and I took the bottle out of my backpack and I set it on the coffee table between us. I didn't say anything at first, I just let it sit there, and I watched her face. The smile didn't disappear all at once, it faded slowly. I'd be like someone turning down a dimmer switch, and in its place came something I'd never seen on her before. Not guilt, not shame, fear. She was afraid, not of consequences, not of police, not of what the world would think. She was afraid of exactly what she had been afraid of my entire life. She was afraid I was about to leave. She looked at the bottle, and then she looked at me, and her lips parted slightly like she was going to say something, and I cut her off. I said, "I know what this is. I took it to a clinic. They told me what it does." And I waited. I waited for her to deny it, to tell me I was wrong, to come up with one of her perfectly reasonable explanations that made everything make sense. But she didn't. She didn't deny it, she didn't cry, she didn't raise her voice, she just sat there, still as a photograph, and looked at me with the most hollow, desperate eyes I've ever seen on another human being. And then she said the sentence that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. The sentence that broke something inside me I've never been able to put back together. She said, "If you got strong, you'd leave me. Everybody leaves me." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no begging for forgiveness. Just 9 words delivered in a voice so flat and so empty it sounded like she was reading them off a wall. And the worst part, the part that still keeps me up at night, The part that no therapist has been able to fully untangle is that she meant it. She wasn't being manipulative in that moment. She wasn't performing. She was telling me, with complete honesty, the reason she'd spent a decade poisoning her own grandson. She was lonely, and she was terrified of being alone, and she decided that a sick child who needed her was better than a healthy one who might not. That was the math she did in her head, and she made peace with it, and she stirred those drops into my food every single night with steady hands and a hymn on her lips, and she convinced herself it was love. Please subscribe to this channel if you would like to get notified when we publish stories that you might like. Let's continue with the story. I left that house the same night. I didn't pack much, a backpack with some clothes, my parents' photograph from the nightstand, and the brown bottle that I kept wrapped in a sock at the bottom of the bag because I knew I was going to need it. I didn't yell at her before I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't give her the dramatic exit she probably expected and maybe even wanted, because the dramatic exit is still a form of connection. It still means the other person matters enough to scream at. I just stood up from the couch, walked to my room, put my things together, and came back to the living room where she was still sitting in the exact same position, hands in her lap, eyes fixed on the coffee table where the bottle had been. I stopped in the doorway and looked at her one last time, and she looked at me. And neither of us said a word. There was nothing left to say. 10 years of poison and a 9-word confession had emptied every conversation we would ever have. I walked out the front door and down the porch steps and onto the road, and I didn't look back, not because I was strong, but because I knew that if I turned around and saw her standing in the window, I might go back inside. That's what a decade of dependency does to you. It rewires your brain so thoroughly that even after you find out the person you love has been destroying you, some part of you still wants to sit at their table and eat whatever they serve you. I walked to the only place I could think of, my English teacher's house, Mr. Hernandez. He lived about 3 miles from us. And I had always liked him because he was the one teacher who never accepted my grandmother's excuses at face value. He'd pull me aside after class sometimes and ask me how I was really doing, and I'd give him the same rehearsed answer I gave everyone. "I'm fine, just tired," and he'd nod slowly like he didn't believe me but wasn't going to push. When I showed up on his doorstep that night with a backpack, and a face that must have looked like it had been through a wall, he didn't ask questions. He just opened the door and said, "Come in, Elliot." His wife made up the guest room and put a glass of water on the nightstand and told me I was safe. And I sat on the edge of that unfamiliar bed, in that unfamiliar house, and realized it was the first time anyone had said that word to me, and actually meant it. Safe. Not the version of safe my grandmother had built, where safety meant isolation and sickness and needing her to function. Real safety, the kind that doesn't require you to be broken in order to receive it. Mr. Hernandez helped me file a police report the next morning. I handed over the bottle. I gave my statement. I sat in a room with a detective who recorded everything while I described in detail what I had seen in the kitchen, what the clinic had told me, and what my grandmother had said when I confronted her. They arrested her 2 days later. I wasn't there for it, and I'm glad I wasn't, because I don't think I could have watched her walk out of that house in handcuffs. The same house where she taught me to read, where she bandaged my scraped knees, where she sat beside my bed on nights when I was so sick I thought I was dying. And she did both things. She loved me and she poisoned me, and those two truths exist in the same space, and I have never figured out how to reconcile them. I don't think I ever will. The case made local news. Small town, old woman, sick grandson. It was the kind of story people couldn't stop talking about. And the town split right down the middle, the way small towns always do when something ugly surfaces that nobody saw coming. Half the people called her a monster, said she deserved to rot, said they always knew something was off about how she kept that boy locked up in that house. The other half pitied her, said she was a grieving woman who lost her daughter in a car accident and lost her mind somewhere along the way, said she needed help, not handcuffs, said what she did was wrong, but it came from love. And that second group bothered me more than the first, and it took me a long time to understand why. It's because it came from love was exactly the lie I had been living inside for 10 years. Love that requires someone else's suffering in order to survive is not love. It is ownership. It is control with a softer name. And dressing it up in good intentions and hymns and homemade soup doesn't change what it is. It just makes it harder to see, and harder to leave, and harder to heal from once you finally do. I stayed with Mr. Hernandez and his wife for my entire senior year. They never asked for anything. They never made me feel like a burden. They drove me to doctor's appointments, real ones, where I was finally treated for the damage that had been done to my digestive system over the past decade. The recovery was slow, and my body had been running on poison for so long that it didn't know how to function without it. There were weeks where I felt worse than I had under my grandmother's roof, and I would lie in bed and think, maybe she was right, maybe I do need her, maybe I can't survive on my own. That voice took a long time to quiet down. Some days it still whispers, but it gets softer every year, and the voice that replaced it, the one that tells me I'm allowed to be healthy, that I'm allowed to take up space without apologizing for it, that I don't owe anyone my weakness just because they're afraid of being alone. That voice gets louder. I'm 23 now. I live on my own. I work. I eat meals that I cook for myself in a kitchen that belongs to me, and I don't feel dizzy when I wake up in the morning. And my grandmother took a plea deal and served time in a low-security facility. She wrote me letters, dozens of them, and I read every single one. They all said the same thing in different words. She missed me. She was sorry. She loved me. She wanted me to come visit. I never wrote back. Not because I hate her. I don't. I tried to hate her and I couldn't because she built herself too deep into the foundation of who I am, and hating her would mean hating the only version of childhood I have. But I will never sit at her table again. I will never eat from her hands. And I will never again mistake someone's need for me as proof that they love me, because the hardest lesson I ever learned, the one that cost me 10 years of my health and a decade of my life I'll never get back, is that love isn't supposed to make you weak. And then the person who feeds you should never be the reason you're starving. I shared this story because for 10 years I didn't have a voice. For 10 years, someone else decided what I ate, how I felt, where I went, and who I was allowed to become, and she did it all while telling me it was for my own good. And the scariest part isn't that it happened. The scariest part is how long it took me to see it, because when the person hurting you is the same person tucking you into bed at night, your brain doesn't file it under danger, it files it under love. And you don't question love, not when you're 7, not when you're 12, not even when you're 17 and your body is screaming at you that something is wrong. You don't question it until the silence gets loud enough to hear. So if you're watching this right now and something in your life feels off, something you can't name, at least something everyone around you keeps telling you is normal, but your gut keeps saying isn't, trust that feeling. Don't let anyone convince you that needing help means you're weak, and don't let anyone keep you small so they can feel needed. You deserve to know what your body feels like without someone else's hands on the dial. You deserve to walk a mile in the sun and not be out of breath. You deserve a table where the food is just food. If this story made you feel something, drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever had someone in your life who loved you in a way that felt more like a cage than a gift? I want to hear your story because I know I'm not the only one. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. And if this video helped you see something more clearly, share it with someone who might need to hear it too. Sometimes the thing that saves us is knowing we're not alone.